Great. Well, good morning. Thank you, Katie. Good morning, everyone. This is a meeting of the Permanent Commission on the status of racial, Indigenous, and Maine tribal populations. Our meeting today will take place from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. As we have been traditionally holding our 90-minute meetings. This is the only meeting that is scheduled this week unless we make a decision around additional meetings for this week. I want to make sure before we start that everyone has a copy of the agenda, and we'll reference other materials as we move on. Everyone has a copy of the agenda? Great. So we will start off with welcome and introductions as we typically do. My name is Rachel Talbot Ross and I chair the Permanent Commission. I do sit on the commission in the role of representing a civil rights organization in the state of Maine. We'll go through introductions with Permanent Commission members, then we'll turn to our legislative staff and DOL staff and move on with the agenda. So in my screen, it might be easier just to name it. I see James, Isaiah, Reverend Lewis, Professor Medford, and Keith. If we could just start there, we'll continue. James?
Hey everyone, my name is James Mile. I'm a policy analyst at the Maine Center for Economic Policy, and I'm representing an organization with economic policy experience.
As I read, I'm a student at the University of Maine, Farmington, and I'm representing youth population in Maine.
Good morning. My name is Reverend Kenneth Lewis. I am the pastor of the Green Memorial African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, long name, but I am representing faith-based organizations.
Hi, this is Keith Bisson. I'm with Coastal Enterprises Incorporated, and I am serving a role as a representative of a community development financial institution. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. My name is Marcelle Medford. I'm a professor of sociology at Bates College and here to represent the role of an academic and scholar in the area of race and ethnicity.
Thank you. Dee, Ambassador Dana, Bruce, Joby, and Vice Chief, if you all would introduce yourselves. Dee?
I'm Dee Clark, Executive Director and founder of Survivor Speak USA. It's all things about prostitution. And my chair is representing housing insecurity.
Good morning, everyone. Vice Chief Newell, Passamaquoddy Tribe at Indian Township, way up in Washington County, Maine. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Mully Dana, Tribal Ambassador for the Penobscot Nation and representing the nation to the Commission.
Morning, Bruce King. I do workforce development in Lewiston, and I am filling the seat of impacted minority, member of impacted minority group.
Morning, everyone. I'm Joe Bicoilo. I'm a senior policy advocate with Maine Equal Justice, and I'm filling the role in the commission of a representative of the statewide policy organization with expertise on public assistance and housing issues.
Great. Legislative staff, if you wanted to introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Walsh. I'm the Communications Director in the House Majority Office, reaching the end of my time with the Commission on this particular initiative, but I'm excited to continue to support in other ways.
Reggie Parson, Legislative Aid and Policy Analyst in the Speaker's Office, and also happy to help support this very important work and initiative.
Thank you both. And Cheryl Davis.
Morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl Davis, and I'm with the Maine Department of Labor State Workforce Board, and I am supporting this, helping out with support services here for this commission, and very glad to do so.
Thank you all. Have we missed anyone to welcome, to introduce themselves? Ian, could you please introduce yourself? Hi, Ian, are you there? I know he's traveling. I can see, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had like the double mute on where it was muted twice, but it's Ian Yaffe. I'm with Mano and Mano, representing an immigrant community organization. Thank you.
Thank you all and welcome everyone. So the agenda right now, we typically ask for any corrections or revisions, and we actually have one today. Would like to find out when you all would like Ian and I and Keith have an update on our budget. And after talking with the folks at the Department of Administrative and Financial Services, that's very important that we do today. We can do it before we get into our other work or reserve time at the end. It's completely up to you, but we do need to do that update today. Any suggestions from anyone? So seeing none, I'll take a little bit of liberty here. It's 11:09 and it says we have until 11:15 for to complete this this part of our work. So we'll take the next couple of minutes, 6 minutes, if we could do it in 6 minutes, to give an update on where we stand with our budget. I'm going to ask Ian if he will lead us in that discussion, and then for Keith to add any additional. So Ian, you want to take it away?
Sure, thank you. And sorry that I'm on the phone. I can't see everybody right now for this, but we had a conversation yesterday with the staff at Department of Labor who is responsible for budgeting. And essentially we have to submit, and I think this is like somewhat of a surprise on how fast of a timeline it is, but we have to submit our budget proposal to the department by the end of the week so that it can get approved by August 31st by the Commissioner of Labor. And this is the budget for the next biennium. So it's it would begin July 1st, 2021 until June 30th, 2023. And what we have to do is to submit a budget that both estimates what we expect our expenses for that time period would be and divides those expenses into two categories. One would be the general fund. What's our request for the amount of funding that would come from the general fund over the next 2-year budget? And what is the amount of money that we expect to raise under what's called like a special revenue fund. And so that would be money that we raise through donations and grants. We can't spend that money until it's raised, of course, but we have to basically come up with our best estimate as to what we want the budget for this commission to be in that time period so that they can put that request in. And then separately, we have the $50,000 from the governor, and I think there's some other funding that has already arrived, and that money can be spent before this 2-year budget starts on July 1st, 2021. But that's the task that we have now is essentially if we want money from the general fund, we have to let them know how much that request is going to be tomorrow. So I will leave it there. There is a budget that, had circulated about a month ago that we can circulate again. Essentially, the things that we have to know in order to be able to budget is really what does the staffing model for this commission look like? Everything else is pretty simple to budget from there. And how much do we expect this commission's work to be funded by the general fund? And how much do we expect that this work will be funded by donations and philanthropy? So I might pause there and see what questions folks have. I'm guessing that the ask from here is really just confirming if there's anybody else that wants to be on a call or to work on this besides who's been identified, since we've had some new members join since this all started. I definitely understand how budgets work, but I'm very new to the state budgeting process. So would definitely welcome any feedback that folks have as we try and give our best guess for what we're asking.
I don't mind participating. I have a couple of questions. Does the state serve as the fiscal agent for external funding as well? So if there's foundation support or what have you, would that sit in the Department of Labor? I mean, where does that account live?
I can answer that question. From what I understand right now is that if the money is in the state's account and it's specifically in a special revenue account within the Department of Labor. And so going forward, what we would end up having is both the special revenue account that we have a wide amount of discretion over how much money goes, we would have to raise it, and we have to come up with the path on how it gets spent. But we also would have a separate account, ideally through the general fund, and that would be the money that's coming, that if we ultimately get money from the state for this commission's work, that there would be two accounts for the commission.
And just one note, I think you know this, Reverend Lewis, but the general fund money would be approved through the legislators' appropriations committee.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I was with. Thank you, Representative Talbot Ross. I'm willing to support this process. I'm pretty familiar with the state budgetary process and the process with AFA and so forth and so on. But you know, the timeline is a bit challenging, given that we've not done our strategic plan, and so it's really a guess outside of the need for some policy analytics, some things of that sort, and some data analysis. So I'm a little, the window's awfully tight for us to have a thoughtful process for budget. So if there is one that was circulated, I'd love to see it again. It's probably buried in my file somewhere, so I appreciate that.
I just wanted to add a couple things, and it's 11:16, so if we can extend this conversation for maybe another 3 or 4 minutes. It is rushed, and as you all, I hope you all are aware, our next, the next workload that we have will be going through the strategic planning process, of which we can use our current funding of the $50,000. Plus we, through Keith's efforts, we were able to get $2,500 from the Maine initiatives and $2,000 from Maine Community Foundation. That money, that 54.5 is able to be spent now, so that we can hire someone to do help us with a strategic planning process and some training. But the categories that our budget fall within, just so you get a sense of what we're asking for, is professional services, so staffing, contracted services, training and education, travel money, and technology. Those are the kind of categories that we're asking. We also have to pay a 2% cap, not this fiscal year, but in the biennial, we will pay into the state for services. Everybody pays it. Ours is about 2%. So those are the categories that we'll be submitting the budget on. We are going to undertake, and we can talk about this a lot more moving forward. We are going to put into a budget what they call a per diem or a stipend. The language is interchangeable throughout state government. There is no rhyme or reason or formula for it. There's some stipends of $25 a meeting. They go as high as $100 a meeting, depending on the task and the frequency. But we do realize that there needs to be some per diems, stipends put in order to at least pay folks for their time, given the amount of work that we are undertaking. It's certainly justifiable, but it is not we do not have the legal authority to take the current money that we have in order to pay out stipends this year. We're looking into what happens if somebody would donate that money to us if we're able by statute to accept it. So those are the other considerations. Keith, did you want to add anything before we move on? Or James, I thought I saw your hand up.
Yeah, this is James. I can volunteer to be part of the budgeting process if I can help with some extra insight on the state budgeting process. Yeah, I had another question, but it's been answered in the meantime. So,
Madam Chair, I just have one additional question, if I could, and I'm sorry. And
Absolutely.
The Volunteers of America, who I think went out and got some grant money to provide some support. How do you, and maybe this is a different discussion, but I know that they went and applied for some funding, received some funding, and sought to support our process with that funding. How does that interplay with the budgetary process we're discussing now?
That's a great question. Thank you, Reverend Lewis. And so we announced last week that the Volunteers of America did get that grant. It's a one-time, 1 year, $50,000 that Volunteers of America here in Maine went out and got a grant for the sole purposes of hiring someone. So they would be an employee of the Volunteers of America that would be given to us full use. So whether that's a part-time position or a full-time position, we have to work out the details, but that person would be an employee of VOA that works for the permanent, their assignment, their task is the permanent commission. So we were successful in getting it. We have a meeting set up with their executive director to figure out with DAFs how we want to work that, but it doesn't actually touch the state system at all. The state doesn't really care about it. It will never go in and out of its system. But we do have some decisions to make about the use of that position and when it starts. We've been talking about it primarily as a research analyst and a coordinator of some sort, but thank you for asking the question. Keith, I'll give you the last word and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Representative Talbot-Ross. I don't really have much to add. I think that's a great overview, and Reverend Lewis, it's great that you can participate in that. I think Ian, I don't know if that draft budget went out to everyone, so it might be worth sharing that with the whole commission. I think it might have just gone to that planning group that was working when we didn't really anticipate this type of tight deadline. I'll just note with that, I think we've tried to build out a very robust aspirational budget, I think, to really fund the work of this commission, which we think is significant. And, I won't repeat everything you said, Madam Chair, but I think it's a good place to start anyway in this process, and look forward to continued discussion about it.
Great. It is 11:21. Ian, you had one last thought, and thank you, Keith. Ian, did you have one other thought? I know you put something in the chat, but I wanted to give you to say it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was just, I think, to Reverend Lewis, to your point, my sense is that the staff at Department of Labor just want to start having things put into the state's computer system here. And that at the end of the day, this is really just a placeholder budget so that they start thinking about the commission as something that spends money and not just $500 a year. And that ultimately, once we complete some sort of strategic planning process, that there would need to be a long-term conversation with appropriations around how all of these things are basically going to change probably between now and next July 1st. We're just trying to get the placeholders started for the idea that there's going to be 2 accounts within Department of Labor, and potentially looking at having some positions get authorized subject to future funding. So I'll send out the budget proposal that we had worked on, just so that everybody's working from the same information, and then we'll follow up with the folks who identify themselves as wanting to continue the conversation.
Yes, and thank you, Ian. I just want to make sure that everyone understands the $50,000 that we received from the governor from her contingency fund is not a yearly allotment. That is a one-time show of support that the governor gave us, which is very well received, but that is not, so we have to build in monies. So two separate budgets, general fund, other special revenue that will go forward, and the Department of Labor has to approve the budget before it's submitted. So it is a tight turnaround. Thank you all. Thank you, James and Reverend Lewis, for joining us. We'll give you the information on our call with Marilyn from DAS, which will take place tomorrow. So it is 11:24. We'll move on with the rest of the agenda, if everyone's ready. So we've got a couple things to accomplish today. One is we do need to vote on our recommendations. You were all sent a copy of the draft report that itemized where bills were being categorized and what tier they were. So we're going to talk about the final report. We're going to take a final vote, and then wrap up with talking about our meeting schedule and work that will take place moving on. I actually, prior to opening up this report, if you all have it available to you, I, in reading it, saw a unfortunate oversight for a bill that I'm going to ask for reconsideration even at this point, and that is a fair chance in employment bill that got, I don't know how it got left out, but unfortunately it did. It is a bill that I sponsored, so true transparency, it's LD 2087. And if you recall in our report, we have fair chance in housing as a tier 1 bill, understanding the demographics of who this applies to for second chance. It is a typical ban the box bill, but it applies to both private and public employment. And it is a bill that I worked quite a bit with the State Chamber of Commerce on to reach some agreements on banning the box on all employment applications in order to initially judge people on their qualifications before doing any kind of background check. And this will disproportionately impacts brown and black people who are disproportionately incarcerated in the state of Maine. So LD 2087, I'm asking for reconsideration. We can discuss it very quickly. We can pull it up. It was a partisan vote in committee. It went before Labor and Housing, and does have the support of the State Chamber of Commerce. There is no fiscal note on it. And for those of you who are familiar with utilizing the Maine legislators website to do your search for bills, you can put up LD 2087 and act relating to fair chance in employment. And I'll leave it there for any discussions. I'd like it reconsidered as a tier 1 bill, following in the same stream of consciousness around fair chance in housing.
And Rachel, if you're uncomfortable with me reintroducing it, I would like to reintroduce it. So
thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, I would absolutely like to push this forward as something that really should be central to our mission. You know, the impact, you know, not only as an individual myself who's experienced it, but also with a large portion of my caseload. I work with individuals with all sorts of barriers to employment. I will say that probably one of the biggest barriers that I see, if not the biggest, is criminal background issues. And I think one thing that needs to be recognized in the state is that we are a state of handshakes. We are a state of, you know, if we can say it explicitly, nepotism. You know, a lot of people make their pitches for a job through family members. And when we have siloed communities, it makes it incredibly difficult to get that kind of face-to-face relationship that could overcome something such as having to check off a box. So really what it comes down to is if we can get people face-to-face in a space, that especially in Maine, I will say, especially in Maine, exponentially increases the chance of somebody being considered for that position. And so I think, like I said, in Maine specifically, and there's ban the box campaigns all over the state, but I think Maine, or all over the country, but I think Maine in particular would benefit greatly from this. So yeah, I think it should be front and center in our mission.
Reverend Lewis here. I'm in strong support of any ban the box legislation that creates fairness for employment, housing, or whatever it might be. And so if that was in the form of a motion, you're seeking a second, I would offer that as a second.
Thank you. So let the record reflect that it would have been moved by Bruce King, seconded by Reverend Lewis. Any discussion on LD 2087 Tier 1, adding it to our employment section? Any discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please just raise. Yep. Isaiah, Vice Chief, are you in? Yep, thank you. Let the record show that that was unanimously supported, and we'll add LD 2087 to Tier 1. Thank you all. We are going to move on to Katie. Would you prefer that we walk through, and Joby and others, Isaiah, walk through the report as a way of conducting our vote, or do you want to go back to the spreadsheet?
I would say walk through the report because, you know, just like 2087, you know, somehow didn't make it on there. I do want to make sure that everything that people believe is in the report is there. So I think we want to work off of that document. A note that I will put at the front is just that I've already heard from you, Rachel, that you would like a language section included here. My proposal for that would be to include the shared definitions that were in that original process document as an appendix, if that works. But that's something that we all want to discuss. But I think we should overall maybe quickly start with the actual recommendations for the 129th legislature section, make sure that we're all comfortable with the bills that are there. If there are any other reconsiderations, we do that and vote on that section, and then move on to the final recommendations for future legislatures section, and have a vote on the, you know, each of the principles and suggested legislation in that section.
Okay, and if I could ask staff to just make sure that if someone could be looking at the spreadsheet while we're going through the report, that would be great. For some reason, I feel like there's a check and a balance there to make sure that we've covered everything. Is everyone open? So we'll use the document to then confirm our votes. So what Katie mentioned is that I noticed when I read through it that we definitely have to have a language section, because we use terms like systemic racism, and not everybody understands what that means. So we have to be really clear in this report by what we're talking about. I think there are other words that weren't included in our original document that had definitions that need to be added. I think we have to have a definition of sovereignty. I think we have to have, you know, again, definition of systemic racism or racism. There are just a language is important. And so we really need to work on a section that allows the reader to understand what we mean when we use certain terms. The other thing that has to be cleaned up is I for one, and it doesn't have to be you or the report, I don't like to use the term people of color. And so I wouldn't like to see it in a historic document. We are a commission on the status of racial, indigenous, and Maine tribal populations. So we have to be consistent in the way in which we're describing people, but also have to be consistent in the way that data is gathered. So if there's a category that's Black African American, even though I wouldn't use may or may not use those terms. We just have to have consistency throughout the document in terms of the way we're using language. Is that?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I thank you for addressing that. That's one of the, I guess, parts of the report that I thought was missing was a complete glossary of terminology. People use the words diversity, equity, inclusion. I like race, equity, inclusion. There's lots of different things we need to kind of for the future. And I think making sure that we can tie back to data, which I will continue to talk about, is going to be very, very important. And try very hard not to editorialize as much, and kind of stay with some real facts if we can. You're muted, Rachel. You're muted.
Thank you. The other term, you know, and I'm with you on the editorializing, but the other piece I'm not comfortable with in one section is around race neutral. So we just have to, we'll have to unpack that a little bit. Along with, I also think the report lacks a section on fiscal impact. So there definitely should just be a separate section that talks about our considerations around the fiscal impact, because as you all know, we didn't really factor that in. You know, can the state afford $3 million for? We did not really do that, and so I think we have to articulate that in the report around how we considered or didn't consider the fiscal impact.
Well, I would say, and I don't know, we're not in a deeper discussion, but we do make a statement which I think probably ought to be modified. We make a pretty strong statement that says austerity equals systemic racism.
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone would agree with that, because I think you have an opportunity in any type of budget to identify what are the most important things. And so shifting of funding to other items in an austerity type of process, others will get upset, but that might be the decision we make. When we say it equals it, I think that's a very, very strong statement that we might want to reconsider.
Yeah. And then the other piece that I thought we should be clear about is we talk about 454 bills. For a reader, they need to understand that those 454 bills are part of a larger group of bills that were considered by the 129th. So 454 bills are not the totality of what the 129th considered. It was only what our task was. And so we have to make it clear that there were 2,000 bills submitted. They're in various places, but our task was just to look at the unfinished work of the legislature, which was 454 bills. So make sure that that's framed in a context. And then I think the only other thought I had was to really identify how many, like the actual number of tier 1 bills and tier 2 bills, because we say 45 bills, but we're not recommending really 45 bills, right? And so we're actually recommending tier 1 bills as a priority, because our task was priority. And so we've got to isolate that number of tier 1 bills as these are our priority. This is our priority list. And then there's this, right, for your consideration as you move into the next legislative term. Does that work for everyone? Is to really be very clear about our tier 1 bills, because those are the bills that we're really championing. Yes, please.
I would just want to clarify that my understanding is that tier 1 and tier 2, we are suggesting for a special session, not for a future term. That's how it's framed in the report.
Yes, you're right. That is the overall recommendation, but our task was what's the priority. So even though those bills move forward like that, there is a reason for tier 1 and tier 2. There is a distinction, right? Otherwise, it would just be all priority bills.
Yeah, I just
So,
want to be clear that we're not saying that tier 2 is for next session. We're saying we would like you to pass all of these bills, but we want you to prioritize tier 1.
So so when I read the report, I fall on the side with Representative Talbot Ross. As written, there's no distinction between tier 1 and tier 2. And I think that there needs to be a distinction. Otherwise, it's left to someone else to determine what we thought was the most highest priority. And while I think tier 2 bills are important in this process, we want those dealt with. If we do not lift up those tier 1s as the most important, I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge from a consideration perspective. We're kind of conflicting with our own process and report a little bit if we don't make the clear distinction that these are the most important from our perspective. And if there's time, if you will, or this space, this is kind of the next list. So that was the only part when I went through it, as if I thought the tier 2 section would be a different section and not given the same billing as the tier 1s from a report perspective.
So I'm happy, may I ask, would you prefer a separate section? So tier 1s first with the kind of mission statements we have in each theme, followed by tier 1, then a section after that's just with the headline of the theme in tier 2, or just at the preamble of the 129th recommendation section, I can make a statement that is, while we're recommending 45 bills for consideration of the 129th legislature, should there be pressure on time or resources, tier 1s are those that we believe would have the greatest impact and should be considered first. Something along those lines.
yeah, I'm still, I framed the 45 in that these 45 survived the process. That's how I look at it. 45 bills survived the process out of 454. And I would like to see the report, and thank you for suggesting it, a clearly delineated tier 1, these are the bills, like, you know, and then a tier 2 that says, we did discuss these and we support them, but they all need certain things in order to have been deemed the highest priority. Otherwise, it's just no distinction. I'll give you an example. Under tribal sovereignty, if you look under tribal sovereignty, we have tier 1, which is 3 bills that we strongly believe need to be passed, right? The tier 2 bills are not even in play. So they're no longer bills, really. They didn't come out of committee. They were woven into other bills. They became part of other bills. So that is a real distinction. We're not recommending all 5 tribal sovereignty bills because there's really only 3 in play. So that's just an example how we can't say we're recommending 45 bills because there's 2 right now that I know of that are dead. Do you see my point?
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's the case for most of the other sections where the tier 2 bills are dead. And I've been operating under the assumption that we are recommending all of these bills. We're making a distinction by saying we're putting certain ones as tier 1, meaning they're our top priority, but we are recommending all of these for a special session. And so I have trouble with changing that at this point. And maybe I misunderstood the whole time, but that's the understanding I was operating in.
So, Madam Chair,
Please.
so my question would be, is a tier 2 bill in one section higher than a tier 1 in another, based on the way we have this designed? So, I'm just concerned that the reader, our intentions notwithstanding, but the reader and those who have to execute and decide we're leaving some things to their discretion. And that's troubling to me. The legislator on the line notwithstanding, that's troubling to me that we're giving that much room for someone else to determine what our intention was. That's my big question. And I would not want to do that. I would want to be very precise as to this is what we'd like to see happen.
So what are other things? Let's open this up. Folks weigh in, because we've got to make this determination, and it's 11:43.
Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
Maybe I'm biased because I'm on the subcommittee, but I think I side with Joby on my assumption was that all of these bills are important to us. And I do think that in the earlier section of the report, it was pretty explicitly stated that what our position was. I do understand maybe instead of saying 45 bills, we can maybe a better way to word that would be to break it up to be this many first priority bills and this many second priority bills, and then explain the difference as it was. But I'm also worried about if we break up so much, it's going to be because I think there's a lot of tier 2 bills that are really important, but don't quite go the distance we wanted. And I want it to seem like these are the bills we want and the bills we almost don't want. I know that's not what is being said, but I think we should it should be lifting up tier 2 bills, but then really supporting tier 1 bills as the model of what we want those tier 2 bills to then become.
Can I, someone who joined the commission, late after the bills were gone through, I guess the question that I have is what were the kind of criteria for defining what sort of falls into tier 2 and tier 1? I understand, or to the extent I understand, right, it's sort of the priorities of the commission, but then is there sort of a secondary process, right? If there are some bills that are dead, should they still be in tier 2? Even though there are things in there that are important? Or when I was reading through the report, just trying to sort of figure out sort of methodologically what establishes something as a tier 1 versus a tier 2 wasn't quite clear. And so I don't know if that's something that needs to be included, to be clarified perhaps in this glossary that we're speaking about, or if it's just sort of a matter of having another level of criteria for establishing tier 1 and tier 2 after we've evaluated their priority to the commission.
So a great question, and I'll ask James and others to weigh in on it. My very quick answer is that tier 1 either was data informed, had some explicit data around racial disparities and impact that we could name, or the information, the demographics with that subject matter were well known to be disproportionate. So access to dental care, or access to child care, or, like our fair chance bills, while we have data on who's incarcerated, there's also a well-known understanding about discrimination in employment and how that falls along lines of race. So James, do you want to help answer this question as well?
Yeah, I think you summed it up mostly representative. I think I'd summarize it by saying the tier 1 bills are the bills that would have the greatest impact in being targeted towards the communities that we're concerned with. And I think the 2 ways that you described it are true. Some of the most explicitly targeted, some of them just affect, very highly disproportionately affected communities. So I think that's more or less it. The one thought that I had was, as I was reading through it, I wondered if there was I had an initial thought that I wanted, if there was more, we could put like a sentence next to each bill to explain sort of why we included it within each section. And I realize that's a lot of extra sentences if you got 45 of them. So I wonder if one way we could sort of really hammer home the importance of the tier 1 bills is we could add sort of our rationale to each of the tier 1 bills. And then for the tier 2, they could just remain sort of listed by LD number and title. But that might help sort of reinforce why they're important and why they have risen to the top.
Does that help, Marcel?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's a matter of sort of thinking through if we're concerned about leaving it to the discretion of legislators rather than sort of being explicit in what defines sort of tier 1 criteria versus tier 2 criteria. It could be a matter of adding it to the methodology section, or right, as James sort of discussed, adding it to each of the sections. So whichever one might be most effective at sort of being explicit and how to frame it.
We talk about the ease and impact, right, as part of that filtering section. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 different criteria, I guess it was, around ease and impact. I don't know if we spend a lot of time talking about the assessment process around ease and impact. We have the exhibits as part of the report, but that's what really stratified the bills. It was, some of it had to do with our own perceptions, since we didn't have tons and tons of data. And so it's not an exact science, but ease and impact was those two words were pretty strong in our overall process, I thought.
So 11:49, I'm gonna start just asking folks if they can weigh in on this, because what we don't get done today, obviously that will require additional couple of meetings if we're gonna stick to our time frame. But Bruce, I just wanted you to find out which way you're leading. I think our choices are really to articulate the distinction between tier 1 and 2, either through writing that rationale for tier 1 and or separating tier 1 and tier 2 literally physically in the document, so that there is a highest, these are the 45 we support, this is the highest priority. So just weigh in if you could, Bruce.
Are you speaking specifically to what I'm talking about with the Fusion Center?
No, for the overall document, how the document is laid out. And I think what Joby was trying to say is he was writing it and was thinking about it in terms of all of these bills we support, and then just articulated the tiers of support within each category. The conversation is about pulling that apart. Be very explicit on the highest priority bills and why. I'm just trying to get other voices in the conversation.
I mean, one thing that we went through when we were going through this process, and part of the considerations that were made had to do with fiscal notes, as well as, it also had to do with, what is the political climate right now? So I guess my one concern about differentiating these too much is that sometimes they reflect the current moment, but I think our priorities need to be wider than that sometimes. And I guess I will speak to the Fusion Center stuff just to say that the bill right now is one of oversight, to offer oversight. The bill itself, I think, is a step in that direction, but it will stay at a tier 2 based on the criteria that we have. I think that the more we understand, I will say how damning, the things like the Fusion Center can be. I think we're going to see that will raise, its profile in terms of tier 1 versus tier 2. But I don't think that we're necessarily at that stage. So I guess my question for it would be, this is a historical document. That's really cool. It's cool to be a part of that. But what I don't want it to be is something that keeps us from being able to elevate some of the issues that are not being put on that level. You know, and I guess the important thing is that we see this as a starting point and we view it in context, and we don't see it as, okay, these are the priorities that we're going to take moving forward. So I'm fine with the differentiation. I just think that it's really important that that we don't lose sight of how we came to that decision. So kind of speaking to Marcel's point of, you know, trying to figure out how did we come to this conclusion. So as long as that's part of it, I think it's a strong document. And, you know, there's a few things that I'd like to add in, and you know, like I mentioned, Joby and I will hopefully get a chance to touch base on that particular issue in particular, but speaking to the whole thing.
Thank you, Bruce. Ambassador Dana, any thoughts about tier 1, tier 2, how to express it? Any thoughts at all?
Yeah, I think that Dr. Medford had a great suggestion that we just clearly, you know, denote what makes tier 1, tier 2, maybe a snapshot of the process, like Reverend Lewis had talked about with the ease and impact graphs that we all use. So we can say tier 1, we're strongly suggesting that these have a great impact. Tier 2 might be some really good stuff, but because of factors like fiscal notes or where they are in the legislative process, this is what knocked them down. So I think if we are going to have like a glossary section, maybe lead it with that, or even have the tier 1, tier 2 explained near the beginning of the report, so that when people, I think as far as flow goes in the document, it makes sense having tier 1 and tier 2 bills of each subcategory together in that subcategory. So we're not jumping to a different place for tier 2s, but definitely stressing those tier 1s. And then, you know, I think people get the sense that this was a very in-depth and intense process we all undertook. So for these bills to all rise to tier 1 and tier 2, they're definitely important. So I think there's a way to cover them all and really zero in on the tier 1s that we want to prioritize, if we're just clear about what both tiers mean, and that we see, you know, realistically having a greater impact, the tier 1.
Madam Chair, could I, just a quick question?
Please, Reverend Lewis.
I'm wondering if the team would consider an executive summary that does that. Is there an opportunity to craft or draft an executive summary that would do that, that you could put on top of this report? I'm always concerned what the walkaway is, and whether or not you get a single piece of paper, a two-pager that really addresses what we want them to consider without diving down through. This is a relatively short report. I've seen some, of course, that are 400 pages long. But is there an opportunity to articulate a lot what Ambassador Dana talked about in an executive summary, and what Professor Medford talked about, that highlights those tier 1 bills, and then someone digs into the report a little bit more to kind of see the process and to see the fullness of the report, the scope and things of that sort. Just curious, or whether or not that's something that might be doable.
So for me, I like the idea of an executive summary. When you were saying it, Joby, the thing that I visualized was the 6th Amendment report. You know, as a member of Judiciary, we actually worked a lot off of the executive summary. It just was quite useful. And then there was the full explanation of the report. So Katie and Reggie, that's what came to my mind when Reverend Lewis made the suggestion, was the way in which the 6th Amendment report was outlined. If we were to go that route with an executive summary, then I want to go back to something that James had suggested, which is we could do the executive summary, and then the within the report itself, there should be at least a sentence about what the bill is, about why we have the bills, because the executive summary is the quick, you know, cheat sheet. But then when you go in the body of that document, you should really try to at least one sentence as to why this bill rose above others. This bill see, so that if we could, if that was manageable, that would be my preference. Keith, Dee, others want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I think I like the executive summary, Reverend Lewis, is a really nice solution to that, actually. And then adding what you just, James's comment, Representative Tuttle Ross, but also definitely, I was just rereading how we've defined the tier 1 and tier 2, and to Professor Medford's point, I think that needs to be clarified and raised up a little bit more, but I think that can be done in a few sentences very easily. So I think that's a nice solution.
Yeah, I agree that we're going in a good direction. My only concerns were, to separate tier 1 and 2, but I particularly was okay with that tier 2 wasn't what we were suggesting, that it was not necessarily going through. I still am.
And Vice Chief Newell.
Yeah, thank you. Every part of my thinking comes from my personal experience, and my personal experience is that it's important for me to retain substance in the positions that I hold, and I think I'm hearing that from Reverend Lewis about being clear about our substance of our commission membership, and being concerned about passing on to legislators the decisions that we should be making. But my experience with the commission here is that we've gone through a lengthy, intricate process of identifying tier 1, tier 2 bills that are important to us to recommend to move forward. So that's the basis of my comfort in retaining our substance, is that elaborate process that we went through. I think was a very that was important to me to justify my substance. Anyway, I don't know if that makes sense, but thank you.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, may I add a couple thoughts?
Please.
Thank you. So just wanted to note that I think as we were writing this report and as time started to lapse, we started to think about the probability of a special session and that versus the definite happening of the future legislatures. And so in thinking about that and feeling like the larger impact was going to be what we were able to recommend to future legislatures, I think we shifted to spending a little bit more time on that final section and on the themes and topics and conversation that we went into such deep consideration about over this process. And with that in mind, that's why we kind of ended up within the 4 special sessions section, just that kind of overarching statement about each theme, followed by the tiers, and spending less time getting into the details about the bills, understanding that these particular bills may not be the ones that we're dealing with. And in fact, as we've talked about throughout, maybe aren't the best bills when you're starting from a square one and able to just say exactly what you want. So that's why we didn't add details on each bill currently. That being said, myself, the report writing subcommittee, the staff are here to make this document whatever you want. And if you want a sentence on every bill, we can absolutely do that. I think that we can certainly I think we can certainly at the start of that special session section have a much more clear delineation about what tier 1 and tier 2 means and the type of qualitative process that went into making that decision. And I certainly can put together an executive summary. I think that's a great idea. That was something that I was kind of thinking about throughout and didn't happen, but certainly can easily enough. But I just wanted to share a little bit of that, why we didn't spend as much time on the particular bills, as a little bit of a little guidance.
That makes great sense, Katie. That makes great sense. Yeah, thank you for offering that. Yeah, really, thank you for that. My lens right now on the report is one of, based on what you just said, is one around history. And so while we most likely won't go back into a special session, or we don't know, that's above our pay grades here. We don't know if we'll go in or not, but the assumption is that we won't. And so with that assumption, I still see this as a historical document and would want to take the time to flush it out as much as possible, than to leave it up to, I think Reverend Lewis had said something, leave it up to the interpretation of the reader. So I see this as a way to really not just document a process that we went through and some values that we all believe, but this will be the very first byproduct of the Permanent Commission. And therefore it has it is a historical document for me. So I like the executive summary piece with being a little bit more in depth around why tier 1, as James has recommended. And it's 12:04. Others? Isaiah and Joby, the rest of the writing team, do you want to weigh in a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to refer to something Reverend Lewis said. I think it would be good to clarify. To me, the answer to a question you posed, that is tier 1 in one category less than tier 2 in another category, I think the answer is no. I think tier 1 across the board are the top bills. And so I think it would be to clarify that in the executive summary. The other thing I just wanted to also point out, so folks aren't surprised when you see it in the report, but I know that ease was one of the criteria we were using in the first 2 phases, or leading up to our final decisions. However, if you look at the list of tier 1, there are some rather large fiscal notes attached to a number of those bills. And so I don't think we can say that that they all met that criteria of being easily passable given our budget and politics. So I just wanted to flag that. But I think the impact of all of them, we would all agree, each of the tier 1 bills did meet the highest level of impact, which is why they're tier 1.
May I add on a little more?
Yes, please.
I guess so I agree about the ease thing, and that I feel like in the end that wasn't as much as of our process, because I think as we can all agree, like solving the issues of systemic racism will never be easy solutions, I think, that are simple or not big financially necessarily. I also I wanted to voice, or what Bruce kind of talked about, like the importance, I guess, I hope I'm interpreting it right, but the tier 2 bills, that there were some that we didn't include or bring up to tier 1 because there wasn't enough data, or but they're still they're very important, and I like the idea of keeping them together, and also including the bills that may not have been shot down, just because I think that also makes the point that these are bills that we shot down already, and they, are ones that we consider important and need to go through. So I think setting that precedent, that showing that those bills were important, and not just allowing them to die because, or us not to consider them because of that. And sorry to continue, but just one last thing, a question of like preferences, something I talked to Katie about briefly, was including in certain sections, mostly in the area where there's little summaries and then the list of bills, 2, 1, and 2. If we should include the language that was used in the commission's like COVID, I think it's the COVID-19 report, which incorporated we, they, which I think is a really good way to look at pronouns, because it shows that it's very personal, and that's not a group of people making decisions for other people. So I was wondering if you wanted to include that where it was appropriate, if that makes sense.
And just so I'm clear, we were emailing a bit about this, but that what you just said is a little bit different than what I had understood. I thought you were saying that we should have a conversation about if we want to transition the entirety of the report into a more first person, we are making these recommendations, we are saying this tense, rather than I kind of did it in the third person just for kind of the consistency of other reports that have gone to the legislature in that more formal third person context. However, I very much see the value and the argument in putting in the first person. So are you suggesting that it be done throughout, or that there be a session where we kind of make a statement?
Oh, sorry about that. The confusion with that. I guess I was saying, like, and most of where I see it being like appropriate is in that section where it's like the introductions to each part, like tribal sovereignty or incarceration, where we could just put in like then our / their white counterparts, something like that. Like if that's what I was thinking. Just quick changes, I think.
So we probably need to make a determination here what we're going to do. The suggestion, I don't want to lose what Isaiah said. Any reaction to that, to the tense, and then we'll take some votes on moving this forward. I don't know. I'm leaning towards whatever the formality of the legislature is used to a little bit, but can be easily talked into anything that feels right for this body. I'm gonna just ask James if he would weigh in, or Keith, Reverend Lewis, you know, James, you probably write a report a week, I'm guessing, for policymakers. So what advice would you give us here?
I mean, I actually feel like I could go either way, which I know is not a very helpful answer. I do think it's more usual probably to use the like more impersonal tone, but I can see the value here in sort of emphasizing the personal connection. So I would probably defer to others.
Keith, got an opinion here?
Yeah, I may be in the same category. I'm not really sure, but I guess I don't see a downside in what Isaiah you're proposing. So I'd have to reread the report to see. I can't even think about how many, like how that changes the document. And I mean, I don't think it would require a ton of changes to do that. So I guess I would err on the side of doing what Isaiah's suggesting.
Yeah, and I'll just ask Professor Medford to weigh in. Style, I don't know. Things that pop in my mind are, validity, maybe. Someone who's the newest member, maybe you can help us.
I think I might offer an equally, unfortunately, neutral answer, that I think that there is a benefit in the way what the charge of this commission is, and then using that type of collective language in writing it, right? So there's always conforming to the conventions if it's going to sort of help push that agenda, but this is partially, right, a report written by a particular type of commission for a particular type of purpose. And I think it actually would be great for that to use collective language of solidarity. So yeah, in that respect, on the side of what Isaiah is proposing, and include a note about why that particular language was used.
Madam Chair,
Reverend Lewis.
I think I did a quick search, and I think we used the word permanent 7 times in a 25-page report. And I think when we're making firm recommendations, we should say the Permanent Commission.
Rather than, I think it just says the commission often. Is that what you're?
Yes.
Got it.
And so, I wanted to see how many times we said permanent. I just did a quick search. And I think that helps with the firmness of the recommendations that we're making, that we use our proper name when we're going to use it. You don't have to use the long version, the full government name, if you will. But I think that there's some benefit to doing that in some places.
Great. So thinking of the last 2 suggestions on the style and terminology, if there are no objections, then the inclusion of the word permanent, and then the more personal demarcations that Isaiah is suggesting, that grammar, along with, we'd have to get a motion to move an executive summary forward, and then expand in the body of the report as our formal vote for what this report will look like. If I've not included, I think with the additional sections that we have already discussed, glossary, that kind of thing. So can someone move this forward so that we can take a vote?
May I ask a quick question before?
Please, Isaiah.
It was asking, you had mentioned, Susan Talbrock, that the use of the word or phrase people of color, and what, I mean, maybe, I'm just not familiar, but what would be the replacement for that language be best?
My apologies, because I can't hear you that well. So are you asking me about the term people of color or about the use of a glossary?
I'll turn off the video. Maybe if I turn off the video, it will help. I was wondering, in the beginning, you had mentioned that that you found the use of term, I think, people of color, and that inappropriate, like about consistency. I was just wondering what would be a better replacement for those terms, so it better reflects like what the commission stands for.
Yeah, I don't want the reader to try to figure out what populations of people we are charged with considering. And so people of color is a very generic term that lacks the specificity I think this process deserves, and the reader should know about it. It should not be left up to the reader to figure out what populations of people we're talking about. So the term people of color is just too broad for me. And it's not a term that I particularly care for, but aside from my personal views on people of color, it just lacks specificity. And we've been trying to be very specific about the populations of people that we're charged with considering.
I'm sorry, my internet went out briefly, so I just want to make sure I'm current in this conversation. The way I understood it is that we're suggesting throughout to replace people of color anytime we reference something like that, to instead say what's in the name of the commission, which is racial, indigenous, and Maine tribal populations.
That's correct.
Great.
Does that help, Isaiah?
Yes, thank you. Sorry if that was already decided. That I agree completely as well.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
Can
please.
I ask a question? Just before we go, I don't know if we'll have a continued discussion. I did just want to Well, first of all, I just wanted to say how I thought this was a very well-written report, and so thank you to the group for doing that. Reverend Lewis raised a question that kind of, when I read it too, it sort of stuck with me, and I just wasn't sure how to verbalize it, but Reverend Lewis did, so thank you. And it was just about the austerity equals structural racism, and while I think that's true to a degree, I feel like it is a very strong statement that is kind of editorializing in a way that I don't know if it's my own like middle of the road like style, or it just seems like that's an area where I feel like we want to build bridges and not I don't know, be inflammatory. But I just wanted to, I wasn't sure if we were going to address that, and I don't want to wordsmith too much, but just wanted to note that it was something that just was the one thing that kind of stuck with me, where I was like, I don't know if that's the best way to put that, but so I just wanted to raise that. So, but I'm happy to vote. I'm in support of everything we've discussed so far.
Madam Chair,
Please.
I know that you're looking for a motion. I will editorialize for a moment. I think that this was a tremendous report, and so the writers ought to be commended for putting this together. It has very few what I would consider substantive edits that I think are required. Just a tremendous job. And so I want to congratulate you on it. I enjoyed reading it, considering that I was part of the process. It really was done very well. I would concur on that particular editorialized statement. I don't think we should say that, and I'll just be very firm. We might believe it in various places, but I don't think we should make that declarative statement in this particular report. I'm willing to move the motion that you'd like for us to move, but I don't want to hamper any other type of unreadiness, since we're not following Robert's rules that well today. So I'll move it if that's in order. I would move the motion as stated by the chair lady.
I'll second that.
Thank you. The motion's been moved and properly seconded. Further discussion?
I have a couple quick language notes. I don't know if this is the right time for it, but they're quick, so it may work, about the tribal sovereignty language. I also really like the report. I thought it was great. What does it say? So it says meet the needs of the tribes within its borders, talking about the tribes within Maine. And I think that as tribal people, we like to think about our homeland predating the state of Maine. So we don't want to think about how we're in the borders of Maine. It's that we're on our ancestral homeland. If there's a way to articulate that. And I had another, it was some verbiage about sovereignty. Having the tribes be able to declare sovereignty would allow them to better. I love that principle. I think maybe with the spirit of having the state recognize the inherent sovereignty might work a little better for the themes that we like to keep with for the tribes. So those are my only two things, and I'm in favor of the motion.
Thank you for that. And I must say that I want this vote to go through, but I respectfully disagree about the austerity part, and that's just as a member of a body that continues to use scarcity as the excuse many times for political will to take concrete action. This feels like probably one of the best pieces of the report for me, because for policymakers, if we don't make this statement that you cannot be scared, you cannot you cannot put this off. I mean, I come from a history of people who have been told this for generations. that, yes, we agree that this is the right thing to do, but we can't afford it, whatever those excuses are. So for me, this is a much, it's probably one of the more powerful statements in the whole report, to not get, that this requires political will. So it's a very strong action statement for me, and I don't see it as sensationalizing at all. But so I think we need to take the vote, and then we can work on these pieces, including adding a little bit more around fiscal consideration, taking a look at the term race neutral and some other things. So any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, just raise your hand. Bruce, yes. Isaiah? Yep. Okay, please let the record reflect that it was a unanimous vote, and I will just add my sincere thanks to the writing committee and all the work that was done to document this process and to get it into this format. Katie, Isaiah, and Joby will just ask you all to reach out to individual commissioners for any assistance in some of these sections. Likewise, commissioners, it's your responsibility to get to each member of the writing team if you've got some suggestions for editorializing. I will ask now for the kind of the writing team, or probably even Katie, if you can just give us a sense of now what timing.
Sure. Yeah. I would say that, so I'm actually personally just out Friday and Monday, so folks know. I think that I could certainly have an updated report from you. Hopefully, I don't want to volunteer too much of Joby and Isaiah and anybody else's time, but I think with a little bit of help from this group, I can have an updated report out to you all before I leave, which is, you know, tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening. And perhaps at that point, that gives the weekend to do another look, to send any notes, any additional notes back. And then I guess at this point, we would need to have one more, I suspect you would all like one more meeting to vote on an actual final report. So my proposal is you get something new by the end of the day tomorrow. You have through the weekend to look at it. We do meet again next Wednesday for a final vote. Open to other ideas, but that's my suggestion.
Thoughts?
I would just say I very much want to help. I think my ability to do much on this between now and close of business tomorrow is a little limited, but that doesn't mean it can't happen.
Joby, would it help if, understanding that Katie's not available on Friday, that we extend that out till Friday and have Katie make the changes she needs to make, hand it off to you and Isaiah, and then if any additional need to be made, the commissioner can expect it by close of business on Friday, take the weekend, Monday and Tuesday, just since if we're not going to meet until next Wednesday, then maybe there's a little bit more time for the revisions to be made.
I think that would help. And to be honest, I'd like to try to stick to end of the day tomorrow if possible, but I think it would be helpful to have that little extra time if needed.
Okay.
If I may add one thing to our potential meeting for next Wednesday too, if that's the track we're going, I think because of this conversation, we could hopefully finish the report in the first half of that meeting. And I had reached out to you all about setting up a meeting about communication around this report. In order to respect your time, I could just integrate that into the Wednesday meeting if that's something that felt good to folks, and if they had any other communications people they wanted to invite.
So that's a fabulous idea. Thank you. So we're looking at a meeting next Wednesday, given the deadlines you've already heard. and our meeting would vote on a final draft, a final report, and then talk about the communication strategy for the report. And I dare say we may be able to fit in. I hope we can then talk about what happens once the report is gone, because we do need to take advantage of this time right now, this fall, to get a strategic plan written and do some fundraising. So how's everyone on next Wednesday? Same time frame, okay? Getting used to this time. All right. I'm gonna ask the portion of the report that we're now calling kind of a glossary. If you've got, Katie, what I think we should do, and I think Reggie is still on, but what I think we should do is send out the current definitions that were guiding our work to the committee. And I might even pick on Professor Medford to pay particular attention to it and see if there's even better way of describing things, or we're missing certain words. So everybody can take a look at this glossary and come to some conclusions, and then we can get it back to the writing committee. So they're not doing both of those things. Does that make sense to everyone? To really, really think about language in very specific ways and add any terms that you think are missing. Okay, great. So it looks like we will meet next Wednesday from 11 to 12:30. We'll see a final report within the next 24, 48 hours. You are, Katie, are you invited, Katie, Joby, and Isaiah, are you inviting further comment before Wednesday by email, by any commissioner?
Yes.
Okay, so further comment by email, and so that we're prepared on Wednesday to take a vote on the report. That is the understanding. We'll all work on the glossary. It is 12:29. Any other business for today? So we'll take the time just to offer our thanks once again to the writing committee for, real heavy lifting on this report, and thank the staff for enormous amount of commitment to the process. I want to also acknowledge each and every one of you. It's great to have a full commission, I gotta say, and all of your hard work and commitment to this process could never be understated. You've done a lot of work. Anyone want to add anything before we? Okay, I'll get a.
Madam Chair?
Reverend Lewis.
Yes, I'd like to pause for a moment just to thank you for your leadership in this process. We are getting towards the end of this particular phase. I think in the midst of legislative work and family work and all the types of work that goes on, you've been steady in leading this group. And so I want to thank you for your steadfastness. You and I have worked together for almost 18 years on various ways, shapes, and forms. And so I just wanted to pause to thank you for your leadership in this particular effort. And I look forward to the next phase of this broader process with the Permanent Commission. So thank you.
Much appreciation. Thank you very much, Reverend Lewis. And I guess we can end, thank you very, very much, on a happy note. It's Happy Women's Equality Day. So for all of you who are fans of the 19th Amendment and the right to vote in this country, today's a good day, right? A very good day. So thank you all. Enjoy your next couple of days, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Bye.